So Apple might be gearing up for its biggest MacBook Pro update in half a decade, because the first MacBook Pro models with OLEDs are now expected to drop next year. That's right, analyst Linda Lin from Omdia has doubled down on a 2026 timeframe for OLED MacBooks, and while she didn't specifically say the MacBook Pros, it's pretty much guaranteed the high-end Pro lineup will get OLEDs before the Air does. It makes sense as well. Apple always debuts premium hardware tech in the Pro range first, and then trickles it down to the Air later on. But OLED is just the beginning. Apple's not planning to just swap the display and call it a day. No. This is shaping up to be the first major MacBook Pro redesign since 2021. And we're talking about real changes here. A thinner chassis, fresh internals, and the debut of next-gen Apple Silicon, M6, M6 Pro, and M6 Max chips, all launching alongside this new design. And here's one more interesting aspect. In a December 2024 report, Omdia made a pretty bold claim that next year's MacBook Pros could ditch the notch entirely. Instead, we could be getting a hole punch camera at the top of the display. So could that mean we're getting the dynamic island on a Mac? That would be wild. We've seen it on the iPhone for years, but never on a Mac. This would be a major shift in the MacBook's visual identity, and even if that particular rumor does not pan out, it clearly shows that Apple is experimenting behind the scenes. Now, if you're hearing all this and thinking, okay, that sounds great, but what about this year's MacBook Pros? Well, that's where things get a little less interesting. Mark Gurman's report tells us to expect the M5 generation of chips for the 2025 MacBook range. So M5, M5 Pro, and M5 Max, not exactly a shocker. Apple's on a yearly cadence with their silicon refreshes. And since we got M4 chips last October, a jump to M5 later this year makes perfect sense. You know what else would make perfect sense? For you to click that subscribe button. It's free and would bring you the latest about Apple right to the subscription box, so please consider it. It would be appreciated. Join the Saran Bite gang now. Anyway, back to this year's MacBook Pro. New chips are great and all, but the only thing is, that's all we're getting. Gurman specifically says this will simply be a spec refresh. No design changes, no display changes, nothing major in terms of features. Maybe a new color, maybe better Bluetooth and Wi-Fi support, but nothing you'd call exciting. Just slightly better performance, about 15% faster thanks to the 3rd generation 3nm architecture, and a bit more efficiency. And honestly, that's fine. These kinds of iterative updates help bring down the price of older models, which are just as good. Because once the M5 Pro and Max models drop, prices on M3 and M4 models should come down, and those models are still excellent. If you're not desperate for the absolute latest, there's never been a better time to get an older MacBook Pro and save your cash. But if you're someone who wants to be on the cutting edge, someone who wants the best display, the best battery life, the most futuristic design Apple has to offer, next year's MacBook Pro is the one to wait for. This is the big one. So let's dig deeper into what we're expecting with the 2026 MacBook Pro redesign. The two standout changes are the OLED display and the new thinner chassis, but there's a lot more nuance to it than that. First off, OLED. We already saw Apple debut OLED panels in the 2024 iPad Pro, and the results were spectacular. The iPad Pro's OLED panel isn't just a typical single stack OLED, it's a double stacked panel which improves brightness, contrast, and even longevity. That's crucial because burn-in is always the big fear with OLEDs, especially on machines people use for years, but with this new display tech, Apple's basically saying, yeah, it's gonna last, do not worry. And since Apple already engineered this panel for the iPad, you can bet they're planning a similar or improved version for the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros. You'll get inky blacks, true HDR content, higher peak brightness, better viewing angles, and best of all, better battery life. OLED's just more power efficient than mini LED, especially when displaying darker content, and so that means these MacBooks could last even longer on a single charge. Now let's talk about thinness. Apple's clearly back on the thin and light bandwagon. The new iPad Pro is absurdly thin, like scary thin, as their marketing material says, and Apple's following that up with the iPhone 17 Air, a device that's expected to be the thinnest iPhone ever made. So it only makes sense that the MacBook Pro also goes on a diet. Now yes, I know that raises some red flags. The 2016 MacBook Pro was also thin, and it was a disaster. Butterfly keyboard failures, thermal issues, no ports. It wasn't a good time. But that was nearly a decade ago, and technology has come a long way since then. OLED displays are physically thinner than mini LEDs, so the lid can naturally shrink. Apple's chips keep getting smaller and more power efficient, and battery tech is evolving as well. We're starting to hear more about silicon carbon battery tech, which packs more energy into a smaller cell. That means Apple can reduce the thickness without cutting endurance. We're also not expecting any major sacrifices. I don't think Apple's going to remove the ports again. They learned their lesson there. And even if the battery gets smaller physically, the efficiency gains from OLED and M6 chips should help balance things out. So yeah, I think Apple's going to pull it off. Just look at the new iPad Pro. It's thinner, lighter, and just as capable as before. In fact, it's arguably better. Apple removed the ultra-wide camera, sure, but no one cared about that anyway. What matters is that they made it thinner without ruining the experience. If they can do that on the iPads, they can do it on the Mac as well. And this redesign could finally unlock something we've all been speculating about for years: the Ultra chip in a MacBook Pro. According to a Chinese leaker on Bilibili, they found code references to a 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro running the M3 Ultra in an internal iOS 18 build. Codenames J514D and J516D were spotted, and that D at the end likely refers to the Ultra variant. Now, an M3 Ultra MacBook Pro was never released publicly, probably due to thermal and battery life concerns. The Ultra is a monster chip, 32-core CPU, 80-core GPU, 512 gigs of RAM, and getting that into a laptop without turning it into a space heater is a huge challenge. But here's the thing, Apple is trying, they're testing, and with the 2026 redesign, which will likely overhaul the internal layout, and of course efficiency improvements with future versions of the Ultra, we could finally see Apple bring this chip to the MacBook. And creatives would go wild for that. Imagine having Mac Studio level performance in a portable machine. Yes, it's a niche, yes, most people don't need it, but there are pros who would 100% buy that. Now here's a more speculative one, but I did see someone on the Mac Rumours forum wondering if the touch bar might return. And while I doubt that's ever going to happen, I do think Apple's keeping an eye on dual screen and foldable laptop trends. Windows machines with secondary displays or full foldables are starting to show up, and Apple eventually is going to join the party when the tech matures and can scale up to millions of units. Right now, foldables are niche and expensive. That doesn't work for Apple's scale, but we've heard rumors of a foldable MacBook, and maybe in a few more years, that could be a thing. For now though, the 2026 MacBook Pro probably won't have a foldable display, but it might have something new like a touchscreen. That alone would be a major shift for Apple's Mac strategy. And if Apple's going to introduce a touchscreen Mac, it would make sense to debut it alongside a redesigned machine. So while that's not confirmed, the 2026 model would be the perfect time to do it. So to wrap up, here's what you should take away. If you need a MacBook Pro right now, wait till the M5 models drop in October, and then buy the M3 or the M4 models for less, because they're basically offering you 99% of the same experience and are still fantastic machines. But if you can wait, 2026 is shaping up to be the year Apple blows the roof off the MacBook Pro range. OLED M6 chips, a thinner chassis, maybe a punch-hole camera, and possibly the first ever Ultra chipset in a MacBook. This is a kind of leap we haven't seen since the original Apple Silicon transition. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, guys. Are you planning to wait for an OLED MacBook Pro? Would you want to see a touchscreen on the Mac? And what would convince you to upgrade? Make sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss any updates. I'll be covering all the latest leaks and news as we get closer to launch. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.